Welcome to channel. Today, we explore story filled with unexpected twists. Please, subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin. My name is James Harris. If you had asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have told you that I was blissfully married to Diana, whom I had loved for almost 14 years. I was also the delighted father of two children, Emily, 14, and Olivia, 14. Back then, I thought I'd made a decent life for myself and my family. I took my role as a spouse and parent extremely seriously. Those titles meant everything to me. But today, I can't even bring myself to use the word proud when I think of my girls, and the prospect of being happily married seems like a cruel joke. My life seems like a ghost of what it once was. The fact is that I am no longer married, and the pride I once had for my daughters has transformed into something I can scarcely express. I've spent my whole life working as a senior engineer for a machinery manufacturing firm. It isn't glamorous labor, but it's honest and consistent. I've spent numerous years putting myself into my profession, working extra hours, fixing issues, and doing whatever it takes to go up the ranks, not for myself. I never cared about flashy automobiles or expensive holidays, just about them and my family. I did everything with Diana and the daughters in mind. I wanted them to have a house they could be proud of, a secure and pleasant place to call home. I wanted them to have possibilities that I never had growing up. I worked diligently to give them with all of the amenities my pay allowed, and sometimes even more if I had to push things a little. You see, my parents had a difficult life. My father, a proud and diligent guy, lost everything in the 2004 recession. I was just a youngster at the time, but I remember the expression on his face as everything came tumbling down, the weight of failure he felt, despite the fact that it wasn't his fault. God bless my mother, who stood by his side as a caring and honest housewife. She didn't complain or point fingers. Instead, Mom did all she could to keep our family afloat. There were times when things were so terrible that my father had to sell our automobile to make ends meet. I can still remember him going 2 miles to work every day, briefcase in hand, his shoulders bowed from tiredness, but his will unwavering. On days when he wasn't feeling well, he'd take the bus, which seemed like a luxury we couldn't afford. I grew up seeing them struggle day after day. I learned what it meant to make sacrifices and persevere in the face of adversity. I had to cancel several trips with my pals since I knew my parents couldn't afford to pay for pocket money. It was not their fault. They were trying their best. But as an adolescent, it made an impression on me. I vowed myself that if I ever have children, they would never have to bear that type of weight. I'd make sure they had a life free of financial worries. That's why I began working at the age of 14. While other kids my age went to the mall or played video games, I worked at a neighborhood workshop. The income was modest, but it was sufficient to meet my needs and relieve some of my parents' stress. I juggled that employment with school and subsequently with university, eventually securing a full scholarship that paid for my studies. I was resolved to be more, to break the cycle of adversity that had characterized so much of my parents' life. My parents did not survive to witness the full benefits of their efforts. They both went away a year after I graduated from university. But I'll never forget the expression on their faces the day I got my first actual job. My father, who had worked so hard and lost so much, looked at me with pride like I'd never seen before. And my mother, she was grinning with tears in her eyes. I'll never forget the day I purchased her a vehicle on my own pay. It was far from new, but it was clean, dependable, and the best I could buy at the time. I recall giving her the keys and watched her touch the dashboard with her hands, as if she couldn't believe it was real. The tears in her eyes that day were more than simply tears of joy. They represented something deeper. An indication that, after much effort and sacrifice, my life was finally on track. My mother died away, and I inherited the modest home and automobile. It wasn't much, but it belonged to us and included all of her and my father's memories. It was what God wanted. I suppose you can't argue with that. Even when your heart hurts, life goes on. Around that time, I met Diana. She was intelligent, gorgeous, and full of energy. We instantly hit it off and began dating. We got married before long. It seemed like a new start, an opportunity to create the type of life I'd always desired, one filled with love and security. Soon after, we had 2 children, Emily and Olivia. Life wasn't ideal, but it was okay. I worked hard to support my family, and although money was not always plentiful, we had enough. I taught the girls the significance of appreciating what they had and distinguishing between what they needed and wanted. At least I thought I did. That illusion was broken one day when I entered the living room and found Emily carrying a brand new Galaxy in her palm. I paused for a moment, blinking and wondering if I was seeing things. "Emily," I said, pointing at the phone. "Where did you get that?" She hardly looked up at me, her fingers still typing on the screen. "Mom got it for me," she said nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I looked at Diana, who was seated on the sofa, flicking through a magazine. "You bought her that phone?" I inquired. Diana glanced up, somewhat offended that I had disturbed her. "Yes, I did. What's the big deal?" I glanced at her, attempting to keep my voice quiet. "The big deal is that I can barely afford the Nokia I gave her last year. That phone costs more than the car I used to drive in university. Why would you buy her something like that without talking to me first?" She shrugged, closed the magazine, and throwing it on the coffee table. "I save money, James. I had enough, so I got it for her. She's a teenager. All her friends have Galaxies." I felt fire rising in my chest, but I maintained a measured tone. "Diana, that's not the point. It's not about whether you had the money or whether her friends have one. It's about teaching them the difference between necessity and luxury. And Galaxy isn't a necessity. It's a luxury. She needs to understand that." Diana reclined back on the sofa. "You're overreacting, James. It's just a phone. It's not the end of the world." I opened my mouth to protest more, but her dismissive tone and the way she returned her focus to the magazine told me it was pointless. Diana had made up her mind, and the discussion was not going anywhere. I let out a deep breath, shook my head, and walked away. However, the irritation persisted with me. I couldn't ignore the notion that this was more than simply a phone. It was about the ideals I was working so hard to impart in my girls, but Diana dismissed it, and the talk ended. A few days after Emily's Galaxy incident, I discovered Olivia with an identical phone. I recall pausing in my tracks. The sight of it struck me like a blow in the stomach. I came right up to her and said, "Olivia, where did you get that phone?" She stared at me with the same unconcerned expression her sister had. "Mom got it for me," she remarked casually. I said nothing to her. I didn't want to dispute with my kid, particularly over something I knew was not her fault. Instead, I went directly to Diana. "Diana," I murmured, attempting to remain cool despite my fury simmering just beyond the surface. "Did you buy Olivia a Galaxy too?" She did not even flinch. "Yes, I did. I told you I save money." "Save money?" I said, my voice rising. "Where exactly are you saving this money? Last time I checked, we had bills to pay, groceries to buy, and a mortgage hanging over our heads. And you're telling me you saved enough to buy not one, but 2 Galaxies? I know how much those cost. Don't treat me like I'm stupid." Diana sighed, the kind of sigh that indicates she doesn't want to explain herself. "I don't see why this is such a big deal, James. They're our daughters, and I wanted to do something nice for them. Why do you have to make it into some kind of moral crisis every time I spend a little extra?" "A little extra?" I said, my voice rising. "Diana, this isn't just a little extra. This is a luxury item that we don't need and can't afford. What kind of message are you sending to the girls? That they can have whatever they want, no matter the cost? That money just magically appears whenever they need it?" Her expression stiffened. "You're overreacting, as always. I've got it handled, James. You don't need to worry about it." The dispute escalated from there. I attempted to make her see my argument, but it was like talking to a brick wall. She had her reasons and explanations, and nothing I said seemed to matter. By the end of the day, she was still upset, and I had been consigned to the sofa. That night, I laid there looking at the ceiling, frustrated. I wasn't buying anything Diana was selling. I wasn't just unhappy about the phones. I was outraged about the bigger picture, the lack of communication, the contempt for the principles I worked so hard to promote. But it was evident that we were on different pages, perhaps even in separate books. The following morning, I went to the facility as normal, hoping to put the dispute behind me and concentrate on my job. But I had no idea how much that day would affect my life. We were summoned to a meeting with high management, the kind of gathering when everyone knows something horrible is about to happen. The factory manager stood at the front, grim-faced, and gave the news. The factory was closing down. All activities were moving to a new site in Mexico. I sat in startled silence as he outlined his rationale. The owners had done their numbers and determined that producing tools in Mexico and importing them back to the United States was a more cost-effective approach to boost company earnings. Of course, the one figure lacking from their spreadsheets was the human one, the lives of those who relied on this factory for a living. As furious as I was, there was one bright spot. I wouldn't lose my job right away. As senior engineer, I had 6 months of work ahead of me. My task was to monitor the plant's demolition and then assist in the establishment of 2 new plants in Mexico. They already had a facility operating there and had even offered me a post. But I was not about to uproot my life and relocate halfway across the globe. Still, they made it obvious that if I didn't relocate to Mexico, I should start searching for a new job once the new facility began operations. That evening, I dragged my feet in the door, my head heavy with the weight of work-related news. Diana noticed, which surprised me. When she questioned, "James, what's wrong?" She used a rare tender tone. For once, I didn't have the energy to avoid the question. I told her everything: the plant's shutdown, the 6-month deadline, and the option to relocate to Mexico. She listened calmly, and for a minute, I believed she comprehended the seriousness of the situation. After a pause, she said, "Would you consider moving to Mexico?" The question took me off guard. I hadn't even considered it yet. It wasn't what I wanted. "I don't know," I acknowledged. "I don't think it's an option I'd want to take. Moving everything, starting over in a country where I don't even speak the language, it doesn't feel right." She didn't say much after that, but the expression in her eyes suggested she wanted me to say yes. She didn't press the matter, however. Instead, she just nodded and returned to whatever she was doing. Over the following 3 months, I immersed myself in work. Dismantling the factory was exhausting, both physically and psychologically. Every day was a grind, coordinating with teams, supervising the dismantling of devices I'd worked on for years, and trying not to think about the impending conclusion. At home, something seemed odd. I was so preoccupied with work that I didn't notice it at first, but one evening, when I came into the living room, I spotted Diana sitting on the sofa, casually browsing through a brand new Galaxy. I froze. The sight of the phone sent off warning bells in my thoughts. I could tolerate Mom purchasing one for Emily and eventually Olivia, even if I despised the concept. But should she also have one? She couldn't dismiss it as a cost-cutting measure. 3 Galaxies in a matter of months, for my salary? Then it occurred to me. The money was not coming from within the home. It could not be. It had to come from someplace, or worse, someone. My thoughts descended into 1,000 terrible regions. Was Diana engaged in anything illegal? I'd heard tales of housewives entertaining guys while earning money. Is she borrowing money from someone she shouldn't? So what about the girls? Were Emily and Olivia engaged in this somehow? My mind became a cacophony of strange, paranoid ideas. Each one was worse than the previous, and I couldn't stop them from adding layer after layer until I couldn't recognize my own logic anymore. Something was wrong, and I wanted to figure out what it was. It didn't take long for my suspicions to unfold. A few days after seeing Diana with that Galaxy, I had a fever. The tiredness from work, the tension about the plant, and the whirling uncertainties in my mind had finally caught up with me. My body caved in, pushing me to remain in bed. I lay there, looking at the ceiling, trying to persuade myself that everything will work out eventually. The home was silent save for a slight buzz of conversations emanating from the kitchen. I wasn't attempting to eavesdrop, yet their voices echoed through the thin walls. "He got me a new earring," Diana said, her tone light and almost thrilled. Emily said, "Wow, Mom, that's wonderful." I felt my gut turn. He? I wondered. Who was he? Melissa said, "Wait, when are you going to drop the bum and move in with Mr. Cooper?" The anger in her comments was obvious. That's when it dawned on me. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had just labeled me a bum, and the home I'd worked so hard to create for them was a trash. The words were crushing and overwhelming. I could not move. I could not think. My whole world seemed like it was collapsing around me, and I felt helpless to stop it. But I was a man of principle. I was not a doormat for anybody, even my wife and girls. The rules apply to everyone in my household. The treachery I had just heard wounded hard, but it also provided clarity. If this was how they genuinely felt, I wasn't going to let them stomp on me anymore. I managed to get out of bed by summoning all of my power. My legs felt weak, and my fever was still dragging me down, but my will remained unwavering. I went into the kitchen. When they noticed me, the talk halted. The air became dense with stress. Diana turned to me, flashing one of her perfected grins. "Oh, honey, you're up," she remarked gently, like if nothing had occurred. I didn't answer immediately. I took out a chair and sat down at the table, staring at them, at the family I thought I knew but now realized I didn't. I could feel their unease rising under my stare, but I wasn't about to lessen it. Yes, Diana, I eventually said, my voice calm but forceful. The bum is up. Her grin faded, and I saw a spark of worry in her eyes. Good, I said. Now I want you to pack your bags and leave this house immediately. He'll be filing for divorce, and you can let me know where Mr. Cooper's house is so I can send you the papers. Diana opened her lips, most likely in protest, but I wasn't done. Also, I said, directing my gaze to Olivia and Emily, who were motionless in their seats, since I know the court won't give me custody of these two, you might as well take them along with you. That appeared to spur them into action. Olivia stood up first, her expression contemptuous. Who wants to stay with a loser like you anyway? She began to scream. Emily jumped in, supporting her sister as she often did. Yeah, Mr. Cooper has way more money than you, and he doesn't have to hide his incompetence behind so-called things like values. The bitterness in their statements didn't surprise me anymore. I felt numb. I carefully rose up, staring at Diana for the final time. Well, in that case, Diana, I said with a firm tone, tell your Mr. Cooper that since he's so rich, he can have you as his wife or whatever relation you want to call it, and take these two as his legally adopted daughters. He'll also be signing over my parental rights for them to him. The room became silent. I waited there waiting for a response, but deep down, I knew they had nothing more to say that would surprise me. Diana's face crumbled as tears filled her eyes. She took a step closer to me, reaching out as if she had just realized she cared. James, please, she said, her voice cracking. I love you. I don't want a divorce. Let's talk about this. We can fix it. I looked at her, unmoving. The remarks sounded hollow, devoid of significance. Where was this love? I replied in an icy voice, when you were sneaking around, accepting gifts from another man. Where was this love when you let our daughters call me a loser and disrespect the man who had given them everything he could? I stepped back, placing there as distance between us. It doesn't matter now, I said. Your love for me was lost the moment it was traded for a galaxy and a gold earring. Her tears streamed faster, but I could not stop. I was done with being walked over and pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I groped for my wedding ring, which represented a relationship that had been reduced to lies and treachery. I slipped it off my finger and carefully put it on the table. The cold metal struck the wood with a quiet clank. Without saying anything, I strolled over to the toolbox in the corner and pulled out a hammer. Diana's cries faded into stunned stillness as I returned to the table. I grabbed up the ring, flattened it on the surface, and hammered the hammer down with all my effort. The boom reverberated through the kitchen, piercing and definitive. The force caused the gold to bend and twist, transforming it into a misshapen, fractured piece of metal rather than a circle. I held it up, staring at it for a time before handing it to Diana. Here, I murmured, my voice calm but harsh. I know you can still sell it for the gold. That was when her weeping stopped. Her expression twisted into wrath, and the mask of melancholy fell away entirely. So, this is how you want to play? She said, her voice rising with hatred. Fine. They'll wreck you in court. They'll make sure you regret this day for the rest of your miserable life. She spun on her heels and stormed out of the kitchen. Olivia and Emily followed her, their expressions mixed with scorn and smug delight, as if they had won something. I did not stop them. I didn't utter another word. I simply stood there, watching as they went up the stairs to gather their belongings. The house seemed heavy with each step, but for the first time in months, I felt strangely relieved. They left later that evening, slamming the door behind them. I remained at the window, watching them pack their belongings into a vehicle and drive away, most likely to Mr. Cooper's residence, whoever he was. Diana stuck to her promise in court. She tore through me like a hurricane, wreaking havoc in her wake. I stood there, impotent, while the judge dismantled my life, giving her practically everything. My 401k is gone, and all of my hard-earned funds have been wiped away. The joint account is now hers. On top of that, I was slammed with a mound of alimony, which was poised to deplete my funds unless Diana chose to marry her shiny new sponsor. And child support payments would continue until both of my girls were 18. I was only permitted to retain my home and vehicle. A hollow win, really. My home seemed lonely today, devoid of the laughter and warmth that it contained. My automobile was merely a mechanism, a tool to get me from one location to another. None of it seemed like a big triumph. I went out of the courtroom, feeling the weight of the world bear down on me. And then I saw him for the first time, Michael Cooper, the guy who had purchased his way into my family. He was standing arm in arm with Diana, Olivia, and Emily. They were locked in a family embrace, the type of scene I had battled so hard to create for years. But now it simply existed for them, without me. Did it hurt? Of course it did. It felt like a dagger was twisting within my chest. A harsh reminder of what ID lost. But will it kill me? No. If anything, it reminded me of one basic truth. I had just gotten rid of some negative individuals in my life. People who did not appreciate loyalty, honesty, or love in the same way that I did. People who saw me as a stepping stone rather than a spouse or parent. Some may question why I didn't fight harder for my girls, seek custody, and drag the issue through the courts until I had them on my side. The fact is that a child's brain is almost completely grown by the age of 14, and Olivia and Emily were both reaching that milestone. Even if I had battled tooth and nail, they would not have joined me. Their thoughts had already been made up. Their devotion was persuaded by the promise of luxury and a better life. They had already been captivated by money. I decided to go over to them, each step heavier than the last. As I neared, everyone turned to stare at me. Diana was the first to speak. "I told you I'd wreck you," she continued, her voice steely and confident. Then Olivia spoke out, and I could sense the malice in her words. "Dad," she said with emphasis, "you're a loser." It felt like a blow in the belly, but I swallowed it. I wasn't going to exhibit further vulnerability. I glanced at Emily, expecting for something different. Some indication that there was still a part of her that cared about me. But she remained mute. She was not going to speak up for me. I could feel it. She had already picked her side. I glanced to Michael Cooper, the arrogant guy standing there with that smirk pasted on his face. "No hard feelings, buddy," he said. "They deserve better things in life. You're just not able to keep up." I stood there for a time, soaking everything in. Everything had led up to this point. Everything that had been spoken came pouring back. I could not let it break me. I smiled at him, but it did not reach my eyes. "You're absolutely right, buddy, I told you. So, I guess you'll be adopting these two by next week, or will they be brought up on my money?" Michael grinned, undisturbed. "Oh, I'm a man of my word," he said, reaching inside his jacket and taking out an envelope. "I've already started the process. If you care to sign, ITLL, all be official." I grabbed the package from him, my hands firm even though my heart was ripped apart. I went over the documents, recognized what they were, and signed my name without hesitation. It was over. Really, there was no turning back. I gave it back to him, and he gave me a duplicate. "I have a lawyer, and he will get this process quickly. You can use the other copy to close the child support." He hesitated for a while, his smile growing. "Also, they'll be marrying Diana next week. You're invited." I couldn't help but grin as I stared at him, this arrogant guy who had stolen everything from me. "Well, congratulations," I responded, my voice full of cynicism. "I hope this time Diana doesn't find a richer man than you." Diana attempted to say something, but there were no words. I saw it in her eyes. She knew I was correct. A lady discovered a higher branch and grabbed it. What's to stop her from seeking for a higher one later? The reality ached, but it was obvious. As Michael had said, both the child support and alimony cases were concluded. Our financial links were broken, and I felt as if I had been completely eliminated from their lives. 3 months later, everything was completed. I did not attend the wedding. Why should I? I had no business being there. It wasn't my life any longer. It was no longer my family. They'd made their decisions, and ID made mine. I went on, despite the fact that part of me understood I was letting go of something I had previously believed to be unbreakable. But, in the end, I discovered that sometimes the toughest thing is to walk away from the people you care about, knowing they've already walked away from you. Now, you must be wondering whether I'm finished. I've lost my wife and my girls. Am I now moving on? I could have, but something inside me shouted, revenge. So I conducted some research on the guy who stole everything away from me. It turns out that Michael Turner, the same guy who had stolen everything from me, was a majority stakeholder in the firm where I worked. I'd heard his name before, but had never seen him in person. He had purchased the bulk of the company's stock around 10 months before, and that was when things began to spiral. The factory shut down, the relocation to Mexico, it all made sense now. He was not interested in increasing the company's efficiency or profitability. He was playing a game. He purchased the shares at a greater price, fully aware that by relocating operations offshore, he would be able to sell the firm at a bigger profit later, as long as the product quality remained consistent. I discovered that the tools manufactured in the Mexico facility not only lacked quality, but also broke down after just a few days. So the firm was on the verge of disaster. The lenders and creditors were about to lose everything. This was not Michael Turner's first time doing this. He had done the same thing with two other firms before mine, bankrupting both of them. What was the result? He went away wealthy, leaving the staff high and dry. I may have been a little senior engineer in their perspective, but I was not an idiot. I knew business and could see through his scam. It was the same old play. He obtained funds from banks and other lenders, acquired the firm, and then demolished the factory. He profited financially by selling the equipment for scrap or to other enterprises. But here's where the real trick came in. He shifted the money around, giving the impression that he was spending in refining the product and making it more cost-effective. In actuality, he was compensating his own firms as suppliers for the services performed. As a result, he pocketed the earnings, the lenders lost money, and the workers were out on the street. Now, how did I receive all of these details? As I previously said, I was entrusted with assisting in the dismantling of the firm, and I met with a vendor who was removing the machinery. The corporate scrap metal business, Eco Metalworks Incorporated, was controlled by Michael's brother, David Cooper. Daniel was purchasing the plant's machinery as scrap, but the machines were in excellent shape. Later, I learned that Eco Metalworks Incorporated had sold the equipment to one of our company's rivals for 60% less than the market value. What did I do with all of this information? Well, I wasn't about to sit on it. I sent a brief email to the banks and lenders from an anonymous address, outlining the full arrangement. However, the email did not remain there indefinitely. It made its way to the local newspaper and, unexpectedly, the mayor's office. What politician in an election year would ignore a corporate scandal in their city? Not one. What mayoral contender wouldn't want to criticize the current mayor for being a part of this scheme? It was textbook politics. The time was excellent. They would never let this go unnoticed. It was all set up to cause a firestorm. I knew it was hazardous, but it was also the best option I had. Michael Turner had stolen everything from me, and now he would have to face the consequences. It only took a week for Customs, the CIA, the Department of the Treasury, and the Federal Trade Commission to all get involved. The probe into Michael Turner's dubious actions escalated into a federal case. And this is something I couldn't believe. Like I already said, life works in weird ways. I was at the grocery store picking up some necessities when I decided to try my luck with a scratch card for the first time in my life. It may seem ridiculous, but I scratched it off, and to my astonishment, I won $950,000 after taxes. They'll retain $614,000 more than I lost throughout the divorce. What is the best part? It was all mine. It seemed weird. The weight of all ID gone through, betrayal, loss, and struggle had just been lifted. That money wasn't just a victory. That was a sign, a hint that life, in its twisted way, had a peculiar way of leveling out. Michael Turner and David Cooper were both under investigation by the agency. Diana and the daughters' lives took a turn for the worst. I was receiving calls from Diana and the girls every day, but I was content to ignore them. They'd made their decisions, and now it was time for me to concentrate on myself. The work at the facility had ceased, and the inquiry, which included the mayor, guaranteed that everyone was paid during this time. I took full advantage of this break to renovate a few items in my home. My home looked fantastic after a week of hard labor and around $55,000 in expenses. It even has a tiny heated pool in its garden. My health improved, as did my emotions. But then, one sunny day, Diana appeared with her kids. They were knocking on the door relentlessly. I opened it, and she rushed in, nearly knocking me back. "Where did you get the money for this?" Diana insisted. Olivia was immediately soaring about the house, inspecting everything. "My room is gone. It has a giant TV in here, and it looks like a home theater," she said, her voice filled with incredulity. Emily followed, walking directly to the backyard. "Hell, there's even a pool," she shouted, almost in amazement. I swiftly rushed between them and said, "Hold on. What the hell do you think you're doing here?" Diana turned to face me, furious. "You stole money from me. I want my share." I glanced at her with a frigid grin. "Married to someone else, Diana, and now you're coming here demanding money from another man? Are you smoking some weird stuff?" She looked at me, her cheeks flushed with rage. "You think you can just get away with everything? I know what you did, and I want my part of that fortune." I crossed my arms, the sensation of control ID recovered during the last few months really settling in. "If you want your share, maybe you should try asking your new husband, Daniel. I'm sure he's got plenty of cash lying around for you." Olivia rolled her eyes. Oh, this is pathetic. Just give her the money, Dad. I turned to her, irritated. Shut up, Olivia. Don't call me that anymore. You made your choice, and it's too late for second chances. Besides, I am legally not your dad. Emily interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. Yeah, why don't you just hand over the cash and let's all move on? Dad. I clenched my jaw. The remarks cut worse than I let on, but I wasn't going to let them get under my skin. You know what? Get out. All of you. Get out. I don't need any of this from you. If you don't leave, they'll call the cops. Diana was shocked for a second before twisting her face in wrath. This isn't over, James. You'll regret this. I responded, No, Diana. You're the one who will regret it. You left me. Remember? You chose money over everything else. Now you can go back to that. I challenged her to take me to court again, and this time I was prepared. I had previously discussed everything with my lawyer and knew what was coming. Diana sat in the courtroom, looking as entitled as ever. She alleged that I did not give her enough of my assets and that I kept money from her. My lawyer was calm and precise as he presented the facts to the court. He explained everything, my unexpected affluence, how the money was generated, and that it was all lawful. The judge, who had been skimming through the case papers, finally glanced up to Diana. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Thompson hid any money from you? He said, his voice firm. Diana paused and muttered, Well, no. The judge cut her off. Then, I'm afraid there's nothing to substantiate your claim. He looked over the paperwork and said, Now, about your request for alimony. Before he could continue, Olivia and Emily rose up, their voices echoing together. He abandoned us, Olivia shouted, pointing at me. Yeah, you're a coward, Emily said, her eyes burning with rage. The judge groaned, apparently fatigued by the show. He carefully removed his spectacles, staring over them at the two females. He held a few papers in his palm before returning his attention to Diana. Mrs. Turner, he replied with a deep voice, You are currently married to Mr. David Cooper. According to the records, I do not see any reason to grant you further money from Mr. Thompson. Diana's face twisted in astonishment. She opened her lips to complain, but the judge remained undisturbed. As for these two ladies, he went on, pointing to Olivia and Emily, since Mr. David Cooper has legally adopted you as his daughters and Mr. Thompson has transferred all his parental rights over to him, he is no longer responsible for you. This case for more alimony is dismissed. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Diana was vanquished. Her requests were denied by the judge's ultimate decision. I could see Diana struggling to find words, but nothing came out. She just stood there, angry, her cheeks flushed with rage. But it didn't matter. It was over. Diana and the girls' calls continued, but something had changed in their tone toward me. They had progressed from demanding, furious, and entitled to something closer to desperation. I agreed to see them one last time, but I was not going to make it easy. I wanted to have control over the situation. I informed them that the only location I would meet them was at my lawyer's office. I wasn't taking risks with them anymore. They arrived dressed to the nines, attempting to project a sense of authority, but I saw through it all. I sat across the table from them and placed my flagship Samsung Mobile on it. The sleek black gadget glittered beneath the fluorescent lights, the same phone I purchased after my unexpected fortune. Diana's gaze quickly shifted to it. You've changed, James, she said, almost in shock. I smiled, keeping my eyes steady. All thanks to you and Mr. Cooper's daughters. Diana's face stiffened. They're your daughters, James, she retorted. I lifted my hand cautiously and delved inside the packet that my lawyer had packed for me. I took out a piece of paper and passed it over the table to her. As for this paper, I continued, my tone firm but chilly, they are not my daughters. Diana gazed down at the page, her face fading. She noticed her husband's signature on the page, which sealed the deal. It has your husband's signature on it, I said calmly. Her eyes welled up. Does a piece of paper make him their father? She wondered, barely keeping it together. I sat back in my chair and crossed my arms. I was done feeling anything for her or them. My rage had long ago burned away, leaving just the cold, hard reality. Yes, I said, my voice calm. It does. That's exactly what you taught me. You were the one who initiated the affair with that man for money. You became another man's wife for paper money. My daughters called me a bum because I had less paper money. They called my home a dump for paper money. So yes, when it comes to you and your daughters, it is all paper. Olivia and Emily began sobbing, their voices unsteady as they murmured, I'm sorry, Dad. I did not flinch. The old emotions, such as remorse and desire for the family we once had, were long gone. Now all I could feel was something different. Nothing. Shut up, I screamed, my voice harsh. And if you call me Dad one more time, I'll end this meeting right now. You're not my daughters. If you want to call someone your father, that's Mr. Cooper. Not me. They both became silent, their weeping fading into choking gasps. It was not enough for them to weep. It was insufficient for them to apologize. I didn't have anything left for them. There's nothing left to offer. Diana finally responded, her voice unsteady but firm, as if she was attempting to maintain what little dignity she still had. We're getting divorced. He wants to get rid of me, she added, her eyes pleading with me. We had a PR nightmare, and now I'll be out on the street with my daughters. There. Are you happy now? When I looked at her, the rage I had suppressed for so long came up. But this time, it was colder and harsher. No, Diana, I said, my voice low and harsh. He is not trying to get rid of you. You were trying to get rid of him. Now that he's looking at jail time, and you know that, you'll not get a single penny. You plan to get rid of him and jump back into my arms just because I have money? You disgust me. I stood up. Not my wife, not my daughters, and not my problem. You want money, get a job. Want a job? Find it yourself. Don't come running to me because I'm no longer your doormat. I turned towards the door. If I ever find you near my house or anywhere near me again, they'll file a restraining order and have you sent to jail. Diana and the girls attempted to put up a show, sobbing and begging, but it didn't move me. I was not moved. Not anymore. They had prepared their beds, and now it was time to sleep in them. I turned away from them without giving them another look. As for David Cooper and his brother, they received precisely what they deserved. The probe had led to their demise. They ended up in prison and lost their riches, though I'm sure they had a lot tucked away in offshore accounts. They were never going to enjoy it, considering the length of their potential sentences. They would not be able to touch that money in their lives. They had no family and no children to pass it on to, so it was all a waste. However, they were not utterly foolish. In an unexpected twist, the Turner brothers took the best logical decision they could. They reached a plea agreement with the government. The government would receive the money, and in return, the Turners would be gone in a few years. I couldn't help but feel a tinge of pleasure at the concept. Justice, in its own way. As I have said, life works in weird ways. The Turner brothers, after all, received their own kind of justice. While they were in prison, a gang of men who had previously worked at one of the factories Michael and Daniel had closed, discovered them. These were the same guys who had been laid off when the factory closed, left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. They made sure the Turner brothers could never walk straight again. And with that, the scales were balanced in a manner that no trial could ever achieve. I've made my peace. I have determined that marriage is not in my future. I've gone through enough to know that I don't want that kind of complexity in my life again. I'm happy. My life is calm, but that does not imply it is empty. The home used to seem empty at times, but now I have 2 German shepherds as housemates. They've added a particular warmth to the room, something I didn't anticipate. I haven't heard from Diana in a while, and to be honest, I don't care. The days after the last meeting at my lawyer's office were a fog. At first, I wasn't sure how I should feel. Relief? Rage? Regret? But none of those feelings occurred, not in the manner I anticipated. It felt as if I had already emptied myself completely. What was left in me was a shell of a man, deceived, misled, and abandoned by those who were meant to love him. But I was no longer furious. I didn't have anything left for it. I was simply numb. Diana's efforts to contact out persisted, but I never responded. Her calls were less frequent as she adjusted to her new life. I had no doubt that the luxury she and the girls formerly sought had fled as soon as it had come. I envisioned the Turner brothers' world gradually disintegrating, just as mine had. They would soon find themselves behind prison, their alleged riches nothing more than a mirage, a transient thing that no longer mattered. It was ironic, in a sense. The Turner brothers had spent years exploiting the system to build their fortunes. They had accomplished this at the cost of families like me. And now, after all their machinations, they would pay the price. I had no pity for them. They had damaged numerous lives, including mine. But eventually, justice will catch up with them. And that's all that mattered. I wasn't finished with them yet, however. After the plea agreement was reached and the inquiry became public, the press had a field day. Michael Turner and his brother, Daniel, were public villains, the type of scapegoats politicians like to use to distract attention. Their identities were splattered throughout all news outlets. It was an unsaid win for me, a guy who had been humiliated, lied to, and rejected. The individuals who had deceived me were suddenly the villains in a narrative that could not be ignored. But I wasn't about to let it go. No, there was more that I could do. ID spent numerous hours studying the financials, communications, and all of the contacts ID established while working for that firm. ID learned the trade secrets and was well aware of the Turner brothers' machinations. So I did what I needed to do. I contacted the few supporters I had left in the business, all of whom had been harmed by Michael and Daniel's deceit. They owed me nothing, but I had leverage. I revealed what I know about their dirty operations. I wasn't simply an unhappy former employee anymore. I was a guy who had taken charge of his own life. I was not going to let them walk away from this. I spent the following several months scheduling meetings, collecting evidence, and accumulating anything that may link the Turners to the murky financial activities they had put in place. As the pressure increased, more individuals came forward with information. By the time I concluded, Michael and David Cooper were facing not just a federal inquiry, but also the downfall of their whole company. I made certain that when it came time for them to face the repercussions of their conduct, they had no place to hide. I saw them lose everything. The firms they had wrecked, the money they had controlled, everything came crashing down. But it was not the finest part. No, the nicest thing was seeing them squirm. The arrogant grins on their cheeks faded as the reality of their predicament set in. When I learned Michael Turner had been condemned to 10 years in jail, I felt strangely satisfied. Had gotten away with so much for so long, harming so many people in the process, but not longer. The system had finally caught up to him. He was going to pay for every lie he uttered and every life he ruined. Daniel's turn would come, too. However, their defeat did not result in actual triumph. No, it was in my personal life. For the first time in years, I felt in charge. It was not about vengeance. It was not about retaliating against Diana, the girls, or anybody else. It was about taking back my own life and creating something out of the disaster they had left me in. I spent the next year focused on myself. I renovated the home, transforming it into a haven for myself and my 2 dogs. I devoted my efforts to my fitness, starting jogging every morning and doing weights at the gym in the afternoons. Slowly but steadily, I was returning to the guy I once was, strong, driven, and confident. I also traveled. There were several locations ID always wanted to go but had never been able to. I made a lengthy journey to Italy simply to try something new. I spent time in little villages, meandering along cobblestone streets, enjoying local cuisine, and meeting individuals who knew nothing about my history. For the first time in years, I felt liberated. I was free from the burden of lies and treachery that had kept me back for so long. But, despite the calm I had discovered, there was one thing I couldn't shake, the sense that something was still missing. And it wasn't Diana, the girls, or any of the others ID left behind. It was the awareness that the life I had made, the one I had worked so hard to achieve, was gone forever. The home was silent, as it usually had been. But things were no longer the same. It was devoid of the joy and warmth that it used to contain. Diana and the children's departure created a gap that I couldn't ignore. At times, I found myself wishing things had gone differently, that we could have worked things out. But deep down, I knew it was simply a delusion. The fact was that we would never be able to return to our former lives. And that was fine. I had to accept it. I also had to admit that I will never be the guy I once was. The one who believed in family and felt that love could solve all problems. That guy had been broken by treachery. Even when I restored myself, that part of me would always be gone. But I was not broken. Far from it. I had learned something vital during those gloomy days. Something that made me stronger and more resilient. I had discovered that I could live. That I was capable of rising above any obstacles life threw at me. And, despite losing so much, I gained something much more valuable, freedom. Freedom from the lies, the manipulation, and the poisonous individuals who had stolen everything from me. And I wasn't about to squander it. I pushed on, day by day, creating a new life for myself. One that was uniquely mine. I didn't need anybody else to define who I was or what I could do. ID previously demonstrated that I could live without them. And I was certain that I would continue to flourish. Diana and the daughter's phone calls eventually ended. I learned from a mutual friend that everyone had moved on. Diana had remarried, of course. What about the girls? They were growing up like they had always done, but with a new father at the helm. A guy with money who could give them everything they desired. That's all they cared about. But I didn't care any longer. I had my dogs, good health, and independence. What more could I ask for? Finally, I understood that sometimes the toughest thing in life is to walk away from the people you care about, knowing they've already walked away from you. But I'd done it. And suddenly I was free. I grinned as I sat on the sofa with the two German shepherds at my feet. The sun was setting outside, creating a nice warmth throughout the room. The home was calm and pleasant. For the first time in a long time, I felt content with myself. That was enough. That concludes the tale. Subscribe and like to view more intriguing stories.